May 9th, Moscow's Red Square, we saw Russian President Putin holding hands with Xi Jinping, demonstrating stronger than ever before ties between Moscow and Beijing. So we are asking these questions today. Where does Russia stand in the ever-changing global map of geopolitics today? And more importantly, what does it mean for Korea? These questions and much more, they're all coming up in today's program, Upfront.
On May 9th, Russia celebrated the 70th anniversary of its victory in World War II. Leaders from 27 different countries, including China, India, and Cuba, participated in the event. Chinese President Xi Jinping demonstrated closer ties with Russia during his visit, which included a summit with Russian President Putin. What brought Moscow and Beijing together so rapidly? Observers point to China choosing Russia as its partner in response to the strengthened Washington-Tokyo alliance. Last month, the U.S. and Japan demonstrated enhanced bilateral ties during Japanese Prime Minister Abe's visit to the U.S. They held summit talks to enhance military and economic cooperation, especially regarding the TPP. Just a few days after, China displayed closer ties with Russia, as if in response to the U.S. and Japan. The leaders of China and Russia have enhanced bilateral ties to an unprecedented level by cooperating in more diverse areas, including the economy, military, security, eradicating corruption, and searching for the remains of World War II victims. On the other hand, President Park Geun-hye didn't participate in the event held in Russia to commemorate the World War II victory. This shows stalled bilateral relations between Korea and Russia since the summit talks they held back in 2013. Korea has missed its chance to get closer to Russia amid strengthening ties between the U.S. and Japan. Another reason why the president's absence garnered attention was because a possibility was raised of an inter-Korean summit during the event. However, the absence of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un from the ceremony in Russia, the possibility of inter-Korean talks faded. South Korea's diplomacy has been floundering on all fronts between the U.S. and Japan, China, Russia, and also North Korea. On today's Upfront, we discuss the fluctuating dynamics in the Northeast Asian region and the rising variable of Russia. How should Korea proceed amid such turbulence?
Welcome to Upfront. This is Kim Jae-chun. Let me start with the introduction of our wonderful guests that we have in studio today, starting with Professor Kim Jae-chun, the Professor of International Relations from Sogang University here, and also Dr. Jin Kai from Yonsei University. He's a research fellow, and he's working at the Center for International Studies. And next is Dr. Irina Korgun. She's a visiting researcher at the Institute of Russian Studies at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. And lastly, Dr. Seung-yeol. He is a senior researcher at the National Assembly's Research Service. This is a research arm for the legislature here in Korea. Welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have a lot of questions as always, and the first question that I want to start with, I want to give this question to Professor Kim as a starter here. And of course, I'd like to invite all other guests to join in as well. That is, you know, we saw this thing in May 9th and Moscow's Red Square, as I mentioned, you know, at the beginning of this program here. Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, kind of holding hands together. And a lot of analysts seem to be believing that this may actually mean the beginning of new so-called a Cold War. Professor Kim, is this too much of exaggeration?
I think it is too much of exaggeration. I would not certainly characterize it as a arrival of a new Cold War era. If you look back at the Cold War history, it was really a global ideological competition between the United States and former Soviet Union. I think the stake was a lot higher. I mean, the stake was with which governing ideology we will be creating international order, both economic and political. So stake there was a lot higher. Today's growing rivalry. It's worrisome. But if you look back at Cold War history, former Soviet Union, the United States, they, of course, cooperated with each other from time to time, but it was most of competition. But today's rivalry, I see as much cooperation as competition. So I really don't think this is your rival. I mean, one other thing is that it's not like Russia and China are trying to overthrow the existing international order. I mean, I think it is just a national interest that they are trying to protect and promote. It's not really ideology that is steering their foreign policies here. So if you ask me, my take is that, well, it's not really a rival of the new Cold War era, something like that.
Right. I'm sure a lot of viewers would agree with your observation, that particular observation right there. But then again, we continue to see many observers and many in the public audience saying that, what about Abe and Obama, right? Recently in Washington, Abe and Obama holding their hands in Rose Garden of White House, and also allowing Abe giving speech at the Capitol Hill. So a lot of people seem to be seeing this like a line being drawn in the world. On one side, Abe and Obama, Japan and the United States strengthening their ties, and on the other hand, as a reaction, Russia and China solidifying their ties. Dr. Jin, what is your take on that? Of course, it has to be modified, but how serious is the division being formed?
Well, I think this is not a Cold War, the beginning of a new Cold War.
Right.
By definition, alliance means a group of two actors facing a common threat. So it is really difficult to say there's a common threat for both China and Russia. Some people may say the US. No, I don't think so. The US is regarded as actually a competitor for China, not always threat. And they need each other by any means. Well, geopolitically, it may look like alliance, I mean, China-Russia relations, but in fact, I don't think so. It's, common interest.
In fact, recently, India's prime minister was visiting China, right? So in that sense, China seems to be reaching out everywhere, pretty much. So one could say this is a diplomacy, proactive diplomacy of key players reaching out everywhere. But overall, Dr. Lee, what's your observation about what people are saying about the possible emergence of Cold War? Re-emergence of Cold War.
As another speaker has already said about this, is I also agree with that. It's not the return of Cold War, but this is very interesting competition. As the main actor is the U.S. and China, as the company with the Japan and Russia also is working with them. So this is just this competition of to maximize of their national interest. Is very competitive is the region in this Northeast Asia. I thought that.
I see. Dr. Korgun, the timing itself, like Putin moving to one side of the world and trying to reach out to pull his friends or Russia's friends closer, and the Japan and the United States, seemingly getting closer and all that. How do we explain this timing? Why? Particularly at this moment, even though this may be replay of what we have seen all along, what's different about the timing this time when we see these friends getting closer to their own friends?
Well, I would say that the economic dynamics defines a lot of competition that we are observing now in geopolitics, because it's not like during the Cold War times when it was, as Professor Kim said, mostly ideological competition. Today competition is more about economics, and prior to the solidifying of these relations on part of Russia, China, and Washington, Tokyo, we've seen a lot of things going on in economic relations, like there was an FTA between Korea and China. There were, now in the progress we see TPP between Japan and Washington. And China also had this policy of going west, where it expands not only within its own country to the west, but it expands to the west of its borders. It means Middle East, it means Central Asia, it means Africa, and these are territories where China competes both with United States and with Russia. And possibly because this competition is coming to a point where the rules need to be set, we are seeing these alliances to be formed.
I see. Professor Kim, you've been studying international relations for quite some time here, and for a long time we have had these theories of alliance and balance and bandwagoning, and also recent debate about return of geopolitics. What do you observe in terms of something that's different than, let's say, about 2 decades ago or a decade ago that we seem to be seeing these days in terms of possible return of geopolitics?
Right, it's changing geopolitical dynamics. I mean, it's rise of China and the relative decline of the United States that is changing the dynamics of geopolitics in the region, and also the emergence of Asia as the locus of power in international relations, and ensuing rivalry between the United States and China over Asia that is causing this tectonic change in geopolitical game taking place in the region. Because China is rising, China is rapidly emerging as region's hegemonic country in Asia, and of course the U.S. doesn't want to see it to happen. So the U.S. declared the pivot to Asia, trying to reallocate foreign policy resources to Asia, but the U.S. is experiencing a lot of difficulties domestically. So that's the reason why they'll have to rely more on region's allies such as Japan and Korea. On the other hand, China sees this as besiegement. China feels that they are being besieged by U.S. rebalancing strategies. So what are you going to do? You will be looking for a natural partner in the region, and that natural partner is Russia. So all these are happening because of a number of reasons, number of factors. One factor, rapid rise of China and the relative decline of the United States, and emergence of Asia as the most important region of the world.
I think Dr. Jun would be a perfect person to follow up with that question right there. What do you see in terms of China's rise as a possible key determining factor that changes the landscape?
Well, yes. I think the word is not tactic one. It's a dynamic one, and it evolves and changes constantly. And the fundamental change, one of the fundamental changes is the rise of China, definitely. And at this moment, Russia is facing isolation from the West. So it might be the perfect chance for two powers to join hands with each other.
So new power rising,
yes,
looking for friends, and Russia being isolated, looking for friends. And so there is that match you were saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
And meanwhile, the U.S.-Japan alliance is going through a fundamental change. They've been changing from the shared values, institutions, to the shared responsibilities, global responsibilities. So I think for the U.S., there is a confident China, and there is a little bit hesitant South Korea, and there is a militant Russia, maybe, and there is unfriendly North Korea. So maybe perfect time to strengthen its alliance with Japan.
So, of course, the image varies, right? Some of the countries in Southeastern Asia may see China as increasingly potentially militant as well. So, converging, sharing, or communicating your message and your intentions clearly with all other neighboring countries would be an important task for any country around the world. So, in that sense, maybe Russia may have been a little bit lagging in their efforts, right? To clearly communicating their efforts. And of course, some critics will say China needs better efforts as well. But talking about Russia here, the Ukraine situation is of course very important. And for the last whole year period, should we say, we've been seeing the unfolding of the Russian situation with regard to Ukraine. How is this being played out as an important factor of changing dynamics?
It definitely changed dynamics, and it definitely made Russia to protect its national interests, because the Ukrainian crisis didn't just happen suddenly, and it was accumulating in the previous years, and I would say that it is a result of, I would say, defiance of Russia's national interest on part of the Western countries. And it's not only my position or position of the Russian side. You can see many observations in the West as well, that the current situation results because the West didn't take into account that Russia can have national interests. Maybe
such as the NATO expansion.
NATO expansion for sure, and this bothers Russia in the first regard. Yes, and also there were other events that preceded, like in the 90s, how the Kosovo situation was handled, and
the
Russia
contrast and differences and all that kind of stuff, right?
And the double standards, as it is usually termed, that, well, when in Kosovo the decision was acceptable for the West, but in Ukraine or in other spheres of Russia's geopolitical influence, similar decisions do not are not acceptable by the West.
Right. Now, Dr. Jin, I'd like to take our focus to the tie between Beijing and Moscow here. We have already touched upon a few points on this, but overall, what do we see here? For instance, Putin, I think, on the Red Square, he mentioned that we probably meaning together with China, we oppose the unipolar world, and we like to see the world cooperating between different powers and so on. Definitely that's what China is seeing, right? Opposing the idea of United States leading the world, and China wants United States and others to allow rising powers like China and others to participate and join in determining the direction of the global community's decisions, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, to my understanding, Russia has been facing a tremendous, very difficult situation, isolation from the West. And to my knowledge, Russia has never been a true part of the West, culturally and historically.
Right.
And
ever since the day of Peter the Great, they have been struggling with their identity, whether they are truly Europeans or Asians. Some critics say Russians call themselves Asians out of convenience, right? And so, do you think that identity matters, which continent that they belong to?
Yeah, well, I would say it's kind of empathy with China.
In what sense?
Well, maybe ideologically, not necessarily, but at least political traditions, since Russia has been changing in the past decades from Soviet Union to a relatively more modern Russia.
Dr. Jin mentioned empathy towards China, but maybe that leads us to perhaps, Professor Kim, perhaps the most important question of the day. That is, do you think, because of the domestic political situations that Russia faces, right? Some people say if Putin goes on renewing his term and all that, some of the strongest critics of Russia say Putin may be in power the longest time in Russia's history ever. The second, the longest serving head of state after Stalin. That kind of domestic political situation, do you think that kind of resonates with what China sees and all that, the political pressures that they face at home?
Oh, yes, it has a lot to do with the domestic difficulties that they are experiencing. One thing I like to mention is the fact that it's really, I mean, you tend to over-exaggerate the threat posed by China, but China is a power on the rise. I mean, if you look back at the history, rising power has to maintain international order until you surpass, ceding hegemon. So I think that's what China is doing with all the rhetorics about, great new power of a great power relations and all. China wants to continue economic growth within the existing international order until China surpasses the United States eventually, but it's Russia is with all due respect to Irina, but Russia is a country which is in serious decline, in my opinion. It's not just the economy which is in shambles. You just mentioned political situations. The political institutions are deteriorating. All these problems that they are faced with domestically, but the leadership, in my opinion, still isn't really completely over with the Cold War type of imperialistic hangover. So you are running into difficulties domestically, and then what do? You might want to create like crisis situations abroad for divergent purposes.
Right.
So I am a little bit worried because if you look back at the history, as I said before, it's the power that is in decline that has caused a lot of problems in history, not the declining ones. So I pretty much anticipate a lot of confrontations between Russia and the West, the United States and the EU down the road. And it has a lot to do with the domestic difficulties that they are experiencing.
So rising power China causing a lot of ripples, and also, in your view, declining power Russia causing a lot of ripples as well.
As you said before, it's the convergence of interests, the need of China to better deal with American rebalancing strategy toward Asia. Russia is a natural partner there. You team up with, it's not North Korea. And Russia, I mean, to sort of get out of these domestic difficulties, you definitely need, because you are increasingly isolated because of Ukraine crisis that Russia has caused.
Dr. Lee, I want to ask you a question about related point. That is, Russia making these moves, offering suggestions and visions about China, Russia working together on the economic front. What is your view on this, like, overall economic proposals and grand designs that they're talking about?
We need to focus on the more pay attention to not the political issue, but this economic, this cooperation with the Russia and China. And because this meeting is in Moscow, and we need to some pay attention as to both countries increase of the cooperation with in area of the economic situation. Because of we can read as Russia's strategies to overcome this isolation from the Western countries. They need find the plan as China, and this cooperation will be helpful Russia as the strategy to raise of the income of the economic incomes from the China and the gas energy and the industry and some kind of railroads and the industry, and this is very important for Russia to develop and sustain of the economic situation.
So overall, that's a very important development.
Yes, it's very important things.
Then I suppose we need to have Dr. Jin coming in, the Beijing perspective. All this talks about, the cooperative development of oil, gas, and railroad. How significant are these from Beijing perspective?
Obviously, it is very significant. And I think the best scenario would be to merge China's One Belt, One Road strategy with South Korea's Eurasia initiative, and also Russia's plan to develop its territory in the Far East region. That will be a multiple win-win situation.
I see, for sure. I need to switch back quickly to Dr. Lee here again, because my next question is about military and security here. And of course, the cooperation between Beijing and Moscow, the military side has been highlighted. And I would like to invite Professor Kim later on to your point about your observation here. But how significant are these? Some of these people were saying, the reporter were saying, the Russia and China were even sharing military radar codes in their joint military exercise in the Mediterranean area and all that. How far do we see them going further into this deep cooperation, the two powers?
This is the military exercise is a response to of the U.S. and the Japanese the new guidelines and the focus on this military cooperation.
So let me clarify here. You were saying this is Russia and China's response to the revision of United States and Japan military cooperation guidelines.
Yes, it's very important issue because of the for China, since this is a new guideline, is inclusive of the Senkaku Islands as the disputed areas as the joint defense area as both of the China, the U.S. and the Japan's. So this is stimulate of the China is some kind of the emotion or angry, and so China also is need to find some kind of to counter a measure of this is a movement. So the Russia also is again used as the isolated from the Western country and Ukraine's issue. So I think that to both of them is we need some kind of cooperation. I think this cooperation will be developed in this not only economic areas but also in the political and the security and military areas will be continuous also for some time.
I see.
Yeah.
Professor Kim, then we have to ask this question about the impact on Korea, both like economic side and then military side, this deepening cooperation between the two powers, China and Russia, doing all this grand design, economic cooperation projects on one hand, and also further cooperating on the military side. What do they all mean for Korea, Professor Kim?
Economic deal between China and the Soviet Union, if it evolves into a full-fledged economic cooperation, I think it'll have significant geopolitical as well as geoeconomic implications to the region as well as to Korean Peninsula, as well as Dr. Jim mentioned. China has this grand strategy, One Belt, One Road, 一带一路 strategy that is to connect Eurasia with pipelines and railways and build infrastructures along that Silk Line. And Russia has its own version of the Eurasian project. And Korea also has our own version of the Eurasia initiative.
That's true.
But the thing is that if the cooperation, economic cooperation between the two countries evolve to the extent that they really cooperate on these Eurasian projects of their own version, I think it means that expansion of China's sphere of influence in the region, and a lot of countries in the region, including South Korea and the Korean Peninsula, will be eventually subsumed under the influence of expanding China's economic influence, at least economic influence in the region. So in terms of power balance between the United States and China, if this economic cooperation evolves into a full-fledged cooperation, it means that the shifting of balance in favor of China, and it means that Korea will be placed in a very, very difficult position. Military cooperation, I don't think it'll ever morph into a tight security alliance. Sure, they held
You don't
joint,
think so?
I never, no,
Okay.
no doubt whatsoever.
Looking back to history, they don't really have that
They have
history,
so many
right?
differences, and because
Right.
of strategic culture, I mean, it's a huge commitment. Security alliance means that you have to allow the others to have access to these sensitive military facilities and sharing all this sensitive intelligence information. It'll never happen between the two countries. So I really don't think that the region is really dividing into tight alliance camps, as we had witnessed during the Cold War era. And what we are witnessing is really a shifting allegiances. We will be witnessing a lot of shifting of allegiances between these four countries you just mentioned. But still, I mean, if it does divide into two camps, and if it really escalates into really a serious rivalry between the two camps, oceanic power and continental power, it'll put South Korea and Korean Peninsula into a very, very difficult position.
Right. Well, those were very important points, but we have to move on to the next point. That is North Korea.
Right.
Interesting headline that we saw recently was Kim Jong-un abruptly canceling his plan to attend this 70th anniversary celebration in Red Square.
Right.
I'm sure there are all different perspectives, but your own personal view here, what do you think has happened? What's behind this abrupt cancellation? You have to speculate as well.
For sure, I have to speculate, which is not usually a favorable thing to do. A good thing, it's not usually appreciated.
Right.
But anyway, I would say that the domestic situation has something to do with his decision. It's not only like the invitation itself and the perspective of meeting leaders of other countries, including South Korea, but it's also domestic situation and possibly domestic rivalry. Like we've all saw the headlines about this assassination, and it does execution, yes, and it does mean that there is a lot of things going on in North Korean politics, and perhaps something inside stopped Mr. Kim from going to Russia. And besides, I don't think that it changed fundamentally anything in relations between Russia and North Korea.
You don't think so?
I don't think so, because just before the announcement was made and right after the decision by Mr. Kim Jong-un, Russian officials traveled to Pyongyang and they talked about very important issues in economic cooperation between Russia and North Korea. And there was no change in what they said about intentions before the decision was made and after. So all the projects will be going on and countries will commit. So in terms of cooperation, I don't see any fundamental changes.
Right, I see. Dr. Lee, you are a long-time watcher of North Korean affairs for sure. And what do we see ahead for North Korea in this, what seems to be a very tricky play, if you will, or game that they have to play on this tightrope, keeping the balance between their relationship with Beijing on one hand and then the other one on Moscow and all that. What do you see ahead here after this, particularly after this decision of cancellation and all that?
As she says, I don't know what behind the story of why the Kim Jong-un is canceled this participation in Moscow. However, traditionally, North Korea is had their diplomatic strategy, as they had some both hands. One hand is the relation with China, and another hand is the relation with Russia, and so.
Traditional strategy that has been in place for decades.
Okay, as they want, and from the 1960s, and so it's very hard to because of the after collapse of the Soviet Union, and this is the justice the relation of the China and the Pyongyang, China and the North Korea can be continues until now, but. From the 2030s, after the third nuclear test, and this is just before the inauguration of the Xi Jinping government, as this is the provocative action is the stimulate of the proud of the China, and from that time, we can see that the statistics and the exchange of the high-ranking officials to both of them as stopped now. And so these opportunities for North Korea is a very good chance to recover as to overcome the isolation of the diplomatic isolation. So why the Kim Jong-un is has give up? As why he has give up this chance? But now from this as the this is missing the opportunities. I think it's affects the future of the North Korea. Because of the next opportunities will be in September as the China's anniversary, 70th anniversary of this Victory Day. I think is these chances will I think is very important to North Korea, and the North Korea should decide as to participate in or not and at this moment. And I think it's the very critical point for North Korea.
On that point, I think this is a perfect timing to connect with Professor Georg Toloraya from Moscow State Institute of International Relations. This is another Moscow perspective we are having. And Professor Toloraya is joining us from Washington. He is currently visiting Brookings Institution at this point. Professor Toloraya, thank you for joining us.
Hello.
Right. So we want to start with our first question, which we have dealt with here among with our guests, but we want to invite a Moscow perspective, of course. That is the abrupt cancellation by Kim Jong-un in terms of his planned visit to join the 70th anniversary celebration in Red Square. What is your take on that? I'm sure a lot of observers have their own speculations, but we'd like to have your view on this.
We are disappointed that he didn't come, but not to the extent that it could spoil the relations. After all, formally, DPRK, North Korea, was represented in Russia at the summit level, at the supreme level, because nominally Kim Jong-un is the head of state. So, from a protocol point of view, North Korea kept their obligation to send the leader, to send the state leader, nominal state leader in this case, to a Russian parade. So we don't have any kind of reasons to be unhappy about that. Of course, a chance was lost to have bilateral talks and move on the projects, but nevertheless the relations are going forward, and we have lots of tracks of cooperation and negotiations on economic affairs. So I don't think that it will affect much bilateral relations, although this momentum, the chance was lost.
Okay, the final question. We've been talking with our guests here, about the future relationship between Beijing and Moscow, and the consensus seems to be that the relationship between those two superpowers will get even closer and stronger. And I want to invite your view as a Moscow or a Russian perspective on this question. Do you also see that the tie between Beijing and Moscow will further get strengthened from this point on? What's your take on this?
All right. Well, Russia and China relations are having now the unique relationship, one of the few in history when two big powers have very cordial relations, very close, both economically, politically, and militarily, and don't have much contradiction so far. So our relations are, at the best level for the whole history of Russia-Chinese relation now. Actually the problem is there's almost no way to go up, And I think the relations would develop, but we should not expect any dramatic, spectacular shows or spectacular events in them. They will develop steadily.
Thank you, Professor Toleraya, for your wonderful views. Thank you. All right, now we will turn our focus to South Korea here now at this point. Kim Jong-un's cancellation was not only cancellation that we know. We cannot probably say it was a cancellation, but we were expecting, right? President Park possibly attending this ceremony. Right, we were expecting,
yeah,
right?
So
it was not exactly cancellation, but indeed it was not materialized.
Yes.
What can we say about what happened here from, maybe I should ask Professor Kim about this, what has happened on our side in terms of not materializing this expectation? Any speculation?
Well, there was a speculation that there's going to be a summit meeting between President Park Geun-hye and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un
if she decides to go, right?
Venue. So, and certainly a lot of people are saying that she shouldn't be passing up this opportunity. But I think precisely because of this possibility of summit meeting, she decided not to go because it could have been really awkward. I mean, if you want to have a summit meeting, you don't want it to be held on foreign soil as a sideshow to Russia's main event. If you want a summit meeting to be held, it's got to be held on the Korean Peninsula. And secondly, you got to have a clear objective of summit meeting. You just don't want to hold a summit meeting for the sake of summit meeting. So I really don't think both leaders are ready to meet at this juncture, although I hope both leaders would meet eventually. Secondly, I think another factor that entered the minds of President Park when she decided finally not to go is the fact that South Korea will somehow have to maintain a unified front with the international community against Russia for causing Ukraine crisis. I think it is only Angela Merkel, the only leader who
from the West.
From the West, but as the leader of Germany, she had this moral obligation to pay a visit to this event. But I think it is important for South Korea to maintain this unified front with the international community to send a strong message to Russians that this wasn't really was ill-conceived, efforts to aggress toward Ukraine and annex Crimean Peninsula. And all in all, I don't think that this did really a critical damage to bilateral relations with Russia. Russian ambassador to Korea confirmed this. All these bilateral cooperation is still intact.
Right.
Russia is still very happy to continue this bilateral relationship with you. So this wasn't really a bad decision at all.
Okay, Dr. Jin, I have to ask you this question about the point that Professor Kim just mentioned. Yeah. Korea's imperative to maintain its allegiance or taking side with the United States and Japan or Western world here. There is a growing concern that Korea is being increasingly sandwiched between the need on one hand to get closer with Beijing and on the other hand maintaining its the foundation of friendship with the Western world, so-called Japan and United States. What do you see here? Do you see this dilemma for South Korea as a real one from Beijing perspective, or do you have a different take on this?
Generally, I agree. As John Mearsheimer said, South Korea is facing the most difficult geopolitical situation in the world.
Okay.
It's Poland. And I partially agree. But at the same time, I think South Korea is actually the node or the pivot of a number of issues, including some of the U.S. competition and Northeast Asia cooperation, and South Korea and China and Japan relations. So, the diplomacy of South Korea could be a little bit more smart and
in what way?
And creative, for example.
Oh, creative.
Just maybe one example. Why not just do not excessively or completely fix your security concern with U.S. alliance, and on the other hand, and fix your economic concerns in Chinese market. So let's say diversify your diplomatic investment. That could be a...
Okay, so don't say that we are totally with China on economic side and we are totally on U.S. side for security matters, but be a little bit fuzzy.
It's like strategic, tearing your diplomacy apart.
I see, right. Okay, I think that makes a perfect sense here. But then again, going back to what Korea can do with given situation, talking about this time InterKorean relations, Dr. Lee, we saw on the Red Square. I don't think we have a full story about what exactly had happened, but Yoon Sang-hyun, the political advisor for President Park here, attending on her behalf and this celebration on one hand, and then Kim Young-nam, isn't he the figurehead of the North Korean state? I think he's official head of North Korean state. I may be wrong about this, but both of them meeting together on the Red Square and having some conversation here. What is your observation there? Was it meaningful enough with a given limitation? What's the observation?
I think it's the two men is met in Moscow, but there is no political intention, meaning because as you know, as the North Korea's Kim Young-nam is just as president of the North Korea, but he's just as a representative, diplomatic representatives of North Korea have no real powers. So this meeting is impossible. This is not mean of the momentum to make a momentum of the to improve of the inter-Korean relations. It's not. I think it's not. But
do you see Yoon Sang-hyun possibly carrying President Park's subtle message of intention to open dialogue with North Korea? Kim Young-nam could be act as a channel, bro.
Yes, this is I think is the diplomatic rhetoric, as just because of the for a long time is the relations of the inter-Korean, as there is exception of only summit talks can solve of this many kind of the issue as between the two Koreas.
Right.
So this is just this meeting is so many times we had happened as in our the history of the relations of the inter-Korean. But I think is we need this point. We need from time we find a way of to break through to be reconciliation is the Korean peninsulas. We should find as how can achieve the summit talks and between two Koreas.
To add to that observation, inter-Korean relations really is in dire situation, in grave situation, improvement which will require more concerted and well-designed approach. And to think that the improvement, the relationship will improve by exchange of diplomatic greetings from envoys from two Koreas on foreign soil. It is a mistake. Attaching any meaning to this, close encounter will be a great mistake.
I mean, as you said, the two Koreas seems to be at a very critical juncture here. So, what are some of the things, in your own personal view, that South Korean government can try with given all these constraints?
Well, I think it is very important for South Korea to work on high-level talks.
High-level talks?
Because President Park's, Park Geun-hye government's approach has been this, what many people call functionalist one. We will have to start cooperating on these smaller issues, softer issues, such as exchange of these separated families, holding cultural events and so on and so forth. And by holding these events, by cooperating on these soft issues, we can generate trust. We can generate trust to each other. And once enough of trust is generated, then we can move on to the discussion of some of the more intractable security issues, military affairs. But that has been the approach of President Park Geun-hye toward North Korea. I think this, what I would call bottom-up approach, is important, but what is also important is a top-down approach, holding high-level talks at the same time and easing tensions on the Korean Peninsula, easing military tensions. So I think these two approaches will have to move in tandem, but what is missing in Park Geun-hye government's approach toward North Korea is this top-down approach. So I think it is very important for South Korea to work on resumption of high-level talks to ease tensions on the Korean Peninsula.
Right. Dr. Jin, from Beijing perspective, keeping in mind what Professor Kim has just mentioned about what South Korea may need to do with regard to inter-Korean relations, and also keeping in mind the Moscow factor that we've been talking about the whole time today, what is your own personal desire that you want to see materialize in terms of what South Korea should do in the future to improve its relationship with North Korea, as well as improve relationship with its major neighboring powers?
I think 2 points I want to make. First, the external factors are important, great powers. Yes, it is, but not the decisive ones. Second point is, I think I agree with Professor Kim. I think the high-level talks between the two leaders or the high-level officials will be necessary, not like the occasional ones in Moscow. That's not very important ones. And I think only after a series of not occasional talks and meetings, the summit may come, and by that time, the momentum may come.
I see. Dr. Korgun, as a wrap-up here, we've been talking about Moscow, Russia, and these factors. The same question goes to you. What would you like to see South Korea to do in the future in order to improve its relationship with not only our neighbor North Korea in the north, but Russia as well? What should we do? What should we keep in mind?
I would say that very important is to have a consistent strategy. Because until recently, neither Russia nor Korea didn't have a very clear strategy of cooperation with each other. So the cooperation saw ups and downs, and it was very much dependent on the international situation. But in order to ensure broader engagement, something more clearer vision is important. And it also would help to improve inter-Korean relations. Because if we are speaking about North Korea, Russia had a consistent strategy towards North Korea starting from 2000. So from the year Mr. Putin came to the office. And Russia has been consistently realizing that strategy. And all those projects that we are seeing now, they were planned already at that time. And I would say that having some master plan, master vision between Russia and South Korea would also contribute to improving inter-Korean relations as well.
Right. So key advices or suggestions for Seoul this time would be to have clear vision and sense of direction, if you will, in terms of dealing with important partner in this global dynamics, Russia. And also, don't be bogged down with this, simplified view of black and white, like one side, everybody belongs to one side and the rest belonging to the other side and so on. So have a more balanced view. I suppose that would be wonderful ideas to share this time. And with those, we'd like to wrap up this program at this point. And I want to thank big time for our guests here for joining us and sharing wonderful views today. Thank you very much. And we would like to offer a very special thanks to our viewers who have joined us from all around the world. And we certainly want you to come back for our next time in this program, Upfront. Until then, goodbye.